Hello everyone, this is TheNelston. Welcome back to another video. If you've spent any time playing Wynncraft, you've probably run the Forgery's corrupted dungeons at least once. These corrupted dungeons are, in essence, harder versions of their normal counterparts. For example, did you enjoy the cancer that is Sandswept Tombs parkour? Well, you'll be pleased to know that the corrupted parkour is even worse. Regardless, my decades of research into these dungeons have culminated in the production of this objectively factual corrupted dungeon ranking list. I'll be going from the worst to the best and explaining why I rated them in the way that I did. I ran through the dungeons on my divs or archer, so your experience may differ from mine if you're on a different class or archetype. However, remember that my beliefs are empirically accurate and yours clearly are not. Without further ado, let's get straight into the video. In the number 7 spot, we have the corrupted Ice Barrous. Was this ranking seriously a surprise to anybody? From the start, this dungeon is pure pain because in order to complete the first room, you need to obtain 10 tokens. Unfortunately, these guys are harder to find than Ted Cruz's Dignity, so you have to spend a good few minutes just to get through this part. Then, the next room is even worse because it contains ice parkour, the worst kind of parkour. This, combined with the fact that the color combo of light blue and dark red is really jarring, makes the parkour room an absolute pain to deal with and look at. Oh, and there are also barrier blocks that prevent you from cheesing and skipping the parkour because screw you. After that is probably the most fun section of this dungeon, I would say, which is the grinding room. I like this one because you get to obliterate hordes of mobs, which is always enjoyable, although if you're not careful and you're on a glassy class, kind of like my archer, you get kind of obliterated by the biting gusts, so you gotta be careful. Then you get to the walking puzzle room, where you try to figure out how to get to the other side of the room on barrier bridges. The concept is neat, but honestly, after you memorize the pattern, it's kind of just an annoyance, since it never really changes. Afterwards, you get to do perhaps the single most annoying room of all, the running room. Why is this even a thing? The walls are simply an artificial slowing mechanism that really don't serve any true purpose other than to mess with parties running the dungeon together, and I mean a great example of challenging passages that either encourage speedrunning or slow clearing without deliberately inflating the time needed is the Great Bridge from Nasak to Troms. But instead, they use this really boring and infuriating system which sometimes doesn't even work properly because there are barrier blocks that prevent you from running full speed ahead with your escape spell if you're on archer, for example. Sometimes you'll even get stuck in the wall because why not? After that, you get to the final room before the boss, the mini-boss room. All in all, I wouldn't say that this is a terrible room because, I mean, it's just a token collection room, it's not really unique in any way, but what really gets annoying is that if you have more than one blue token in your inventory and you right-click on the altar with one of the blue tokens, it'll remove all of the blue tokens from your inventory, but only place in the one that you were currently holding, meaning you then have to go back and redo the bosses that you had the blue tokens for. If you have all 3 tokens, yes, that means you have to go back and do the other 2 bosses. Once you finish this room, you're ready to challenge the boss, and as you can probably guess from the theme of this rant, Corrupted Theoric is kind of just a boring boss. I mean, sure, he has a shotgun attack and he does a bunch of other cool stuff, but he's not really, challenging in any way. As long as you keep your distance from him, and, you just try not to get hit, I suppose, by the shotgun, which only happens in Phase 2, by the way, it's really not too hard. And it kind of just rips off the whole, don't get too close idea from, I would say, corrupted, decrepit sewers. So it's just not great, in my opinion. It's also not really fair if you have bad ping, right? Because if you don't see him teleport behind you, you kind of just get obliterated without a chance to react. And finally, I mean, the rewards are not terrible. They're usable. They're actually pretty good. For example, Peaceful Rest is pretty good. Runa Safe Passage is useful in some healer builds. Ooth Boots, right, are nice for the set bonus. And Pole Starter, Pole Stopper are 2 great necklaces that you kind of slap on. Overall, I would say that the team really dropped the ball with the Corrupted Ice Barrous. It's grindy, it's tedious, it has an artificially long playtime, and it just makes me want to lobotomize myself so I don't ever have to think about it again. In the number 6 slot, we have the Corrupted Lost Sanctuary. The unique mechanic of sniping innocent creepers to collect their brains for the purpose of nuking walls really appeals to my passion for committing war crimes, but there are several issues with the rest of the dungeon that really hold the Lost Sanctuary back. For one, the initial burning bridge section is interesting as a concept, but in practice, it's easily cheesed with the horse, and its design basically ensures that it artificially separates parties that then have to wait to regroup. The rest of the rooms leading up to the boss are pretty standard and nothing memorable, but I think the boss is where this dungeon really falls flat. To start with, Gareth deals way too much damage per hit to be such a low-level dungeon boss. Sure, he is designed to force you to run around constantly, but the margin for error is too slim, and classes without high walk speed basically get boned the moment he prepares to charge. Additionally, what is up with the creepers? These guys are more rare than Turkish people who won't tell you without prompting which nation they're from, and they're dumb as rocks because they'll occasionally decide to yeet themselves into fire, thus causing you to lose the TNT that they drop. Even after you get all 9 pieces and open up the lava pit, you have to play Ring Around the Rosie with Gareth for a few minutes until he decides that he no longer wishes to be alive and walks in. What's the strategy to get him in every time so quickly? Nobody really knows because his phases are so random. Sometimes he'll walk towards you and be done with it in seconds, other times he'll charge for a minute straight and refuse to die, and if you're in a party, good luck getting him to aggro properly and just fall in. Oh, and did I mention he can charge out of the lava pit at any time, because why wouldn't he be able to? On the bright side, the rewards are amazing. Seriously, Rainbow Sanctuary is actually disgusting with how good it is. This dungeon would be much higher in the rankings if it weren't for the really bad boss, but as it were, I really despise the boss fight and I don't really like the token collection system, and so it sits at number 6. In the number 5 spot, we have the Corrupted Sandswept Tombs. I have to say, this used to be my most hated dungeon until I found out about the Fallen Factory, but after learning how to be fair and balanced with escapes while spamming to breeze through the parkour, I have to say that despite the low spot that this dungeon occupies, it really isn't terrible in the grand scheme of things. The biggest problem with this dungeon is kind of just how bland it is. The fighting rooms are laughably simple and easy, the running sections are literally just holding down W, and the parkour is more infuriating than a student driver. Additionally, the boss himself is just bad. There aren't any real mechanics since he has such low health, and it's hilariously easy to solo and kind of just power through the damage without even thinking about trying to learn any of his actual attacks apart from the multi-hits. Despite those flaws, I would say that this is a better dungeon than Ice Barrous or Lost Sanctuary for the simple fact that it's at least decently enjoyable to run. I like fighting rooms because they let me kill a lot of mobs, and I've developed a sort of Stockholm Syndrome relationship with the brutal parkour. Finally, the rewards are actually pretty decent, especially the Ooth Belt and the Plague Bow, which you can use in tier stack builds. Overall, this is not a great dungeon, largely due to its unnecessarily tedious parkour. The other elements have some flaws, but none of them are as glaring as the lack of checkpoints in most parkour sections, except for, of course, the mirror room, which I do kind of like. In the number 4 spot, we have the Corrupted Infested Pit. This dungeon is here because I feel like it fits the perfect kind of middle choice. It's not very challenging, nor is it really unique in any way, and it's exactly the same as the original Infested Pit, with the exception of the mobs being more challenging, and honestly everything is just there. Is it bad? Well, no, I don't really think so, but I also wasn't a fan of the original Infested Pit, so the Corrupted variant is also going to sit right here. Because it's so boring, I'm going to leave this section pretty short. Overall, this dungeon is not bad, but it's not great either. It's kind of like vanilla ice cream. Nobody hates it, but I really doubt it's anybody's first choice. In the number 3 spot, we have the Corrupted Underworld Crypt. This dungeon honestly gets slept on so hard because of the really annoying mob kill requirement, but as a solo dungeon, I think it's really fun. The dungeon looks aesthetically pleasing, and each of the sections stay true to the original Underworld Crypt while introducing new hazards like fire and lava. The animations are really smooth as well, and I have to say, it is just a treat to look at. For example, the boat ride evokes some panic in me every single time just because I hate, but also love the way mobs board the ship and try to kill you as you clench tight and pray. Like Arthur, that this would please just be a normal field trip. The boss fight is also overhauled, and I think the devs realized that every single unit besides Kraken was basically worthless in the original dungeon, so they decided, screw it, make him the only one that players can use in the corrupted version. The way you assemble him piece by piece is both brutal and amazing, and when he stands up and slowly gets ready to slaughter every mob in the dungeon, you can almost hear the doom music starting up in the background. The main gripes I have with this dungeon are twofold. First, the timed survival sections are just too long. I get that there's supposed to be this unique waiting room where you have to try and not die, but they just feel excessively long to me, especially when your party flings the second and third dudes off the side, and you kind of just sit there wondering what the hell to do for the next 45 seconds. Secondly, the boss fight is a little bit tedious, especially since the drop chance for the Kraken body parts is really low, and the bones blend in with the ground so you can easily miss them. If it were made so that the boss works similarly to Gareth, in that there were some special mobs that were guaranteed to drop the boss killing materials, I think this fight would be a lot more fun. Finally, the dungeon rewards are all okay with the exception of Black Catalyst. The dungeon rewards are all pretty decent with the exception of the Black Catalyst, which are pretty broken, although they recently did get nerfed, which is a little bit unfortunate. Overall, I wouldn't say that this is a really bad dungeon, but it is held back by some of the finer details, and so it sits at number 3. In the number 2 spot, we have the Corrupted Decrepit Sewers. As an introduction to the whole Decrepit Dungeons deal, I think this dungeon does wonderfully. It stays true to the original Decrepit Sewers while upping the difficulty immensely to make things more fun, and I think that's its greatest strength. There's just not much to talk about here because everything that the original Decrepit Sewers had is here too, just harder. It's fast, brutal, and tons of fun, and I really love the unique wall mechanic that you can use to increase survivability in the boss fight. Speaking of the boss fight, I really like the way that it kind of forces you to play smart, right? You don't really take it as a threat, especially if you're higher level, but as you can probably see, it does an incredible amount of damage if you're not careful, right? You can immediately get shotgunned if you're standing too close, even at level 105 and above. The rewards are also great, especially the Chestnut Horse upgrade, which makes it almost on par with White Horses for like a fraction of the cost, and the Corrupted Witherhead Bow, which is also great for low-level archers. And finally, the XP reward to key cost ratio makes it really good for leveling up quickly, especially at the lower levels. Overall, this dungeon takes second place, not because it's bad, but rather because the number 1 dungeon is just too good. Finally, in the number 1 spot, we have none other than the Corrupted Undergrowth Ruins. This dungeon has basically everything that a good dungeon should have. The parkour is the only one in the Forgery with unique non-vanilla mechanics, and long sections have checkpoints so that your progress isn't completely lost upon falling. The escort section is also really fun because it reminds me of that Disneyland ride where you shoot aliens from Toy Story. The token collection rooms are, well, not the best, but they're still average at least. I mean, they're token collection rooms, there's not much to say. And overall, the dungeon kind of feels like I'm actually in a jungle, what with all the vine swinging, slimy atmosphere, and bizarre looking mobs. Also, Sliker's taunts actually make me lose morale until I remember I can kick his ass in a couple seconds. Speaking of that, the boss fight is legitimately fun as well. The initial phase where he's hidden in the slimes is a great way to ease into an interesting challenge, and then after he appears, the fight forces you to pay attention to what's going on because he will teleport all over the place, drop these fury auras that you really don't want to walk into, and spawn minions that knock you around and act as a nuisance unless you kill or avoid them. Even if you have the DPS to steamroll the boss, because of how often he teleports around and how much damage he can deal, again, if you're not careful, you can get immediately obliterated. I've seen it happen before, and it's happened to me before. I've lost 7 out of 7 runs all the time because I wasn't careful. And geez, I mean, this boss is just a nightmare to fight if you're not careful. But that's what makes it so much fun. Finally, since this dungeon is a level 93 dungeon, the falling rewards can actually be pretty useful since the armor and weapons in that range can sell for a decent amount on the trade market, and the dungeon shop contains downright overpowered equipment like the Flashfire set for tier stack builds and the absolutely balanced orange lily. The one thing that I dislike about this dungeon is how expensive it is to run, what with it costing toll runes and all, but seriously, this is basically the only dungeon apart from sewers that I actually look forward to doing in each Forgery run. Overall, I really like this dungeon and I think it deserves the number 1 spot. Forgery is one of those things I both hate and adore at the same time. I love running these dungeons for the great soup, but I hate how grinding it can be at times. Some of these dungeons make the grind more enjoyable, but others make me want to log off and go back to beating up kids in bed wars, and today we looked at the objectively factual rankings of the dungeons. Well, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment section below. Leave a like if you liked the video, leave a dislike if you hated it, subscribe for more content like this, and as always, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.